One of the other good things that's happened in the last couple of years is that the privacy world has, in some respects, started to catch up with information security. A lot of you are probably very familiar with ISO 27001 or some of the NIST standards like 853 that really give very granular guidance on how you build an information security program. For years, privacy didn't really have the equivalent frameworks. But in the last year or two, we've had a couple of frameworks be released. NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. It's a government-funded body in the US that builds standards. A lot of the rest of the world would look to ISO, but both of these bodies have actually released standards recently around how do you think about building and running a privacy program. So I would advise you as well, if you're thinking about, I don't really know where to start, going and getting these standards and kind of just having a good sense of what they include and making sure that you're including all of the things that are applicable to you. It saves you having to go and reinvent the wheel. And David, I see your question. I'll get to that in a second. With what I think of, and kind of this goes back to when I was a chief security officer before I really got into privacy, was if you're familiar with the ITIL framework, they look at the IT organization as providing services back to the business. And the way you can think of that is that you're providing things that the business then uses or does with. From a privacy program perspective, you could think about this as a service catalog as well. So one of the things we need to do for the organization is to manage privacy risks. Another thing is we need to do, if a complaint comes in, we need to handle it. If someone asks to exercise their privacy rights, we need to make sure that is handled appropriately. We need to make sure our privacy notice is updated on a regular basis so it matches the business as the business changes. So there's a lot of things that if you break it down, you can say, oh, I can really break my privacy program into a number of services and then think about how those are really going to be rolled out and managed within the organization. I think, David, to your question about what makes a data privacy project become more difficult or less difficult, there's a couple of major factors. Obviously, the organization itself. If you've got a large, complicated global organization, inherently there's going to be more things that you need to worry about and things you need to do than a smaller, more simple organization. But a lot of, in my experience, even organizations that are similarly complicated can have very different experiences. One of the big factors would be the engagement of executive management. How much does somebody want to really do privacy well? I've got a company I work with right now where the chief executive, the CEO of the company, is actually saying, I don't want you to share any of our customers' personal information outside of the organization without going through a full analysis. And then if it's above a certain risk, I want to sign off myself. In an organization where nobody's actually at the executive level is going to give you that kind of backing, it can be very hard to go into teams that are making money and say, no, you can't roll this out tomorrow. We need to do a privacy review. Maybe we need to restrict some of the ways that you're thinking of using this data. So I think that executive backing is also really important. One of the other pieces that comes along with executive backing, of course, is funding. So a lot of organizations have a very small privacy team compared to their security team. And you have to end up doing what I call privacy by collaboration, which is really how do you get the rest of the organization to help you do privacy because you don't have all the resources you need yourself. So I think there are several things that kind of go towards making a project more difficult or less difficult. In the last couple of years, obviously, as well, we've had a lot of privacy technology that's been developed, some of which can really help you do some of those more mundane tasks if you have a good sense of the outcomes you're trying to get to. So I tend to think of if you're building a privacy program, these are the three areas that I usually look at. The governance piece is really about how do you run and operate and manage the program itself. Engineering is actually going building privacy into product, services, technology, anything where you're really interacting with the IT team or product teams or really trying to build privacy functionality. And then the privacy operations team, and when I say team, this could of course all be depending on the size of your team. It could all be one person and just different things that they do, or you could have one person dedicated to each of these. So really the model would scale with the size of your team, but I tend to think about it in terms of these three different kinds of functions that I would be looking for in a well-functioning privacy program. And to help you out a bit, I've kind of broken each of those down into these 12 areas. So again, this is my model. Feel free to use it as you like. It's just something that is based on a lot of the laws that I've worked with over the years. But what I've found is that the laws don't really cover everything in the same level of detail. Things like complaints that I've mentioned before was really important to manage if you want to stay out of trouble. There's not that much around complaint handling specifically in the laws. Often you've got to include an email address or some other way for people to contact you if they have questions or complaints. But to me, I'd like to really think about working with your customer service organization. How do you build out a good program where you're really helping people to understand how you think about privacy? So these are the 12 areas that I've broken out the program into. As I mentioned earlier with privacy by collaboration, security is really fundamental to how privacy works, but it's often not something that privacy teams deliver against themselves. So I would really make sure under that area to think about what do you need from a security team? Just like with this one, what do you need from a customer service organization? What do you need from your procurement function around, third parties and disclosures you might make? How do you work with the security team around instant response? So what I tend to do when I start looking at a project is almost take each of these areas and then do an assessment against them and say, what are you really doing around this? When was the last time you updated your training? Who do you train? What do you train them on? So just to give that structure to how you're thinking about what the program will look like.